Hey everybody, welcome to the Pace of Change Technical Challenge 2016 Team Manager Training webinar. My name is Bill Hickam. I'm one of the Colorado ACMs, and I'm going to apologize in advance for my voice. I'm getting over a little bit of something, so probably sound like I'm talking underwater, but that's unfortunately how I'm talking right now. So we'll go ahead and get started. I think we've got a mix both of new and experienced team managers, so we'll try to kind of address both groups of team managers. As we go along, if anybody has any questions, you should be able to see a little chat box that you can open up on your GoToWebinar little toolbar there. Go ahead and type anything in there. If you've got a question, we'll probably address them kind of at intervals as we go along with the webinar, and we'll do our best to go ahead and answer all your questions. So we will go ahead and get started. To begin with, kind of up front, we'll do kind of some general information, both with DI and with Colorado DI. Like I said, my name is Bill Hickam. I'm the Colorado Affiliate Challenge Master, along with Dave, who can introduce himself here real quick.
Good evening, this is Dave Hogsett. Thanks for joining.
Susie, unfortunately, isn't going to be here this evening. We'll miss her, but I think we'll do okay without her. And then I'm sure all you guys know, but I'll just go over really quickly. We've got the address for the DI Colorado homepage and the DI homepage. I'm going to go ahead and bring it over real quick so you guys can see it, hopefully. And I hope you'll be able to see this. You can kind of go down. They've got all sorts of information on here. You can find out about the challenges, all that stuff. What I'm going to go ahead and show you real quick is go into regions right there. You'll be able to get all sorts of information on your regions. I will scroll down, take a look. I'm from Southwest, so I'll go ahead and hit Southwest. In here, you can find all sorts of information on your specific region. You should know what region you're in. Team manager resources, tournament registration, all that kind of stuff. And if you want to go ahead and find your challenge master, you should be able to go into challenge masters and then find the appropriate challenge master. That'll give you some contact information in case you have any questions. We're kind of the first. Your regional challenge master is going to kind of be the first stop if you've got a question and you're not quite sure where else to turn. We'll also be able to give you answers about if you have specific questions about the site, about tournament day. And I'll go ahead and click on our next slide, and that's basically a list. I probably won't dwell on this that long because there's so many challenge masters there, but again, you can find those if you navigate to your region. You'll be able to find your challenge master and find contact info for them. There's going to be a recording of this webcast there on the DI Colorado page. You'll be able to find your regional website there, clarifications, current info. Keep in mind, the deadline for submitting clarifications is February 15th. That's going to come quicker than we anticipate. And I guess now is kind of a good time to say all the information we give you here is kind of, I guess, considered more unofficial. If you need an official answer, everything that's binding has to come through the clarification process. So basically, all your official information is either going to come from the challenge material itself, from the rules of the road, or from a clarification. I'll tell you that there are already 3 general clarifications out there. We'll go over those. We'll mention those here a little bit later. And then working down the page, we've also got a YouTube channel, all sorts of social media stuff where you can post your photos and videos. So I will hand it over to Dave here real quick, and I think he's going to go over our 2016 challenge.
Thank you, Bill. I also, although Bill and I are across the state from one another, we apparently have the same cold that's affecting our voices. So if I don't sound like this on tournament day, you'll understand. So the focus of tonight's webinar is really to drill in on the technical challenge, which is pace of change this year. Very exciting, potentially very interesting technical challenge. What we're going to cover tonight really encompasses the technical challenge per se. This training is a supplement to other training you may have already had or may still be planning to get. That is about more general manager training, which would include things like instant challenges and team building and so forth. So we may touch on those things, but we will be focused tonight on the central challenge. So the central challenge is the major part of the DI experience. It is the part of the program where teams are expected to spend a significant period of time, 2 to 4 months, evaluating the challenge that's been presented by the challenge masters and coming up with innovative, creative, reliable solutions to that challenge. In addition to the central challenge, we will be doing team choice elements as part of the central challenge, and we'll talk about those a little bit more as we go along. This year's challenge is pace of change, and the points of interest are that you're going to design and build a vehicle able to carry at least one team member across the presentation area multiple times. The vehicle propulsion system and the vehicle movement method will be changed during the presentation. While this is going on, or before or after this is going on, the team will also be asked to create and present a story about change, and the story will include change in a character. The team will also create and present 2 team choice elements that show off the team's interests, skills, areas of strengths and talents, generally things that are part of their overall solution, but which are not scored elsewhere in the central challenge that you want to draw the attention of the appraisers to. Okay. Next slide, Bill.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure what. There we go. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Again, if you have questions as we go along, feel free to submit them in writing, and we'll be able to see them as long as you direct them to where we can see them, and then we'll try to address them. Now, before I get into more detail about the specifics of the vehicle and the pace of change challenge, let's talk a little bit on how the event itself is appraised. And there are really 3 different sort of metrics that are used, referred to in the challenge as technical methods, technical design, and technical innovation. And each of these has a specific sort of meaning within the context of the challenge in DI, so we wanted to go through those. First is you're going to be asked to provide solutions that include technical methods. And technical methods can really refer to the use of any type of technical principle that you could find perhaps in a textbook or in a subject in an area of study such as chemistry or electricity, mechanical engineering, structural engineering, mathematics, biology, physics. If it's the kind of topic you might hear in a high school or college science curriculum, it's probably going to be focused on technical methods. So when we're looking for movement methods or propulsion systems, and we're thinking about are the methods technical, are they different, and things like that, you'll go back to this understanding of technical methods to try and address that question. Now, when you're actually taking technical methods and applying them to solve the problem, there's 2 aspects of that the appraisers will be looking at and the teams will be judged on. One is technical design. And technical design is really about effective, efficient, and reliable application of the technical methods. Think of this in terms of, was there an intentional plan to make something happen? Did it happen? Did it happen reliably? So some people sometimes think of design as like interior design or more artistic. In this case, technical design really means, has it been designed to execute the method? Does it do it effectively, efficiently, and reliably? Technical innovation, on the other hand, is really more focused on how creative, original, new, or unique the methods are. And those could be the methods for initiating or operating the device, methods of movement, systems of propulsion. This is where the team gets the opportunity to explore things that are very different, very original, very synthetic, and things like how much risk they take, how original they've been, and how much creativity they've brought to it gets evaluated. So technical design is boils down to basically, does it work as it's intended to, and technical innovation is, in addition to how it's working, how unique, different, creative is the solution that's been brought together by the team. All right. So the team challenge for pace of change, like always, is an 8-minute presentation. In this 8-minute presentation, the intention is that the team will bring in a vehicle that makes trips back and forth across the presentation area, and that vehicle will be carrying at least one team member. The vehicle will have a propulsion system and a method of movement, and these propulsion systems and methods of movement will change during the presentation. The central challenge also includes a story about change with elements that are described in the pace of change technical challenge documents. In addition to the central challenge, of course, there will be 2 team choice elements. These are the opportunities to focus on aspects of creativity, design, engineering, or excellence that the team has brought forward that are not really scored elsewhere as part of the central challenge. So let's get into a little bit more detail on the aspects that go into this. First is that the vehicle needs to carry the full physical weight of at least one team member while making trips back and forth across the presentation area. So you'll have to work with your teams to make sure that they understand what that implies and what that means, that it needs to carry the full physical weight of a team member. Also, you will see terms like vehicle and trips and movement methods and so forth highlighted in the challenge, and those all have important definitions or clarifications that come in the challenge to help the teams and the team managers make sure that they have an understanding of what's expected when people are describing a vehicle or trips and things like that. Now, the movement methods, we need to use 2 different movement methods to travel across the presentation area. The teams are rewarded for changing between movement methods between various trips back and forth across the presentation area. The movement methods cannot be a team member, and a team can earn points if their movement method does not employ wheels. Okay? In addition to movement methods, and there are descriptions of this in the challenge, and it's things like rolling or sliding, things like that. There's also the propulsion systems, where again, 2 different propulsion systems are being asked by this challenge. And that is the parts that store, provide, or apply energy to the vehicle and elicit the movement method. So you have both the way in which it moves and the way in which it's propelled that are changing on this vehicle as it goes through this process of carrying team members back and forth across the presentation area. Excuse me. So what is a trip? We'll look at the presentation space, I believe, in a slide or 2. The vehicle has to traverse across the presentation area from one line to another. The distance between lines is approximately 14 feet and 1 inch, and that information in greater detail is given to you in the technical challenge information. It must carry at least one team member the full distance, which is behind line A to across line B, in order for it to count as a successful trip. And the teams will will continue to get points for making up to 40 trips. And a trip can be either direction, line A to B or B to A. You don't have to make a round trip for it to count as a trip. It's just from one line to the other counts as a trip. The change that's required is a switch in the movement method and the propulsion systems between the trips. You can get scored for up to 20 changes, and so you can imagine that as people have finished a trip, have crossed one of the lines, they would do something with their vehicle that would represent a change in the movement method and the propulsion systems, and then they would make an attempt to cross back over to the other line and make another successful trip. That's what's required for points on changes in this challenge this year. The story, of course, in keeping with the theme, will need to be a story about change. The teams are encouraged to integrate the vehicle trips, vehicle changes into the story, and depict a character change using stagecraft, acting, and other means.
All right. Excuse me. So that's a good kind of quick Mach 2 version of the challenge this year. If anybody has any questions on that, now might be a good time. And just for a second, I guess I'll just kind of reiterate what Dave said, that it's a really good idea to zero in on those things when we say trips, change, vehicle, propulsion system, and kind of sometimes break those out. Like he said, they all have their own definition. So you have to kind of sit there and say, okay, we need to make a trip. And then break that down and say, what does a trip mean? And the challenge is going to go ahead and spell that out for you. You know, that usually helps sometimes get unstuck or answer some questions that teams can have. Looks like we're not getting any questions so far. So we'll go ahead and move on. So we're back to the same slide here, kind of what's technical about the technical challenge. Now that we've kind of gone over the challenge itself, kind of recenter back on those technical methods, technical design, and technical innovation. Those are the things in the vehicles, the propulsion systems, and the movement methods that are going to set this challenge apart and that are going to make a big part of the appraisal for this. So in the technical challenge, what we're really going to be looking for is team created. Both of these particular bullet points on the slide are directly from the challenge information. But basically, a team earns more points for technical design and innovation if the movement methods and propulsion systems are team created. Go into a little more detail. Items that are commercially produced or have only modifications that are simply decorative may receive lower scores. Obviously, we're looking to see a process from the team where the team has actually produced those technical elements, understands the technical elements. It's kind of silly, but I've got a couple of the couple of the photos I have down there. A lot of times, and it happens with all sorts of teams. You know, on the left we've got Tesla. That's an electronic car, or I should say an electric car. It's a very technical piece of machinery. You know, and on the right we've got what appears to be a homemade car. Now, if both of these rolled in, you can kind of imagine that's on the surface. It's very easy to see. And I picked these, by the way, before I knew that this particular challenge used vehicles. So it just happens to turn out that way. But, you know, there's a wow factor for the Tesla. But then when you really start to get in and say, you know, the person driving it, the person operating it, how much technical or team, you know, or I should say how much team created technical is there, you know, and definitely there's a potential for that. There could be modifications made, there could be changes made. But then you go and you take a look at something like the car on the right, that's going to be definitely more ground up. Definitely looks like the operator, and in this case that would probably be analogous to the team, used a lot more technical design to go ahead and put that together. So now we're going to jump a little bit forward to the team choice elements. So in addition to all those other parts of the team challenge are the central challenge. In addition to that, we're going to have 2 team choice elements, which are going to be also part of the 8-minute presentation. The team designates both of those team choice elements. They are scored separately from the rest of the central challenge, and they can be anything as long as they're not scored somewhere else, and that's important. If it's scored somewhere else, you're not allowed to designate that as a team choice element. The team will designate that in the paperwork. If it's something that seems a little bit close to something that's scored somewhere else, it's nice to be specific in your paperwork so that the appraisers understand exactly what they're appraising. And those team choice elements are going to be evaluated for both creativity and originality, as well as quality, workmanship, and effort. A lot of times, team choice elements are either a talent that a particular team member has that they feel they can apply to the presentation. Another kind of good rule of thumb, if anybody gets stumped on what our team choice element needs to be, it's very often something kind of the team really got into, maybe spent a lot of time on, is very proud of, and they aren't sure necessarily that, or that's something that they want to be evaluated for specifically, something that isn't caught somewhere else. So it's a chance to kind of find, it's almost like a wild card, something that they want to find to be evaluated on. So quickly, I probably won't spend much time here. This is just a real quick review of the score sheet. You'll notice that several of them we're looking at objective scores, others we're looking at subjective scores. Most of the trips, the changes, and so that's under that subheading 2. Those are going to be mostly objective scores, and then other ones were going to be subjective scores. Down at the bottom, it's just a quick, and this is directly from the challenge material, it gives you a quick idea kind of how heavily certain parts of these are weighted. So trips and changes are weighted fairly heavily, as it is the technical challenge. And then you can see then on the right how those kind of come in and add in with the other parts, the central challenge and the team choice elements, which are both part of the team challenge, but then also the instant challenge, which is going to be a separate thing for the team.
Bill, Bill, why don't I pick up here?
Sure.
First of all, I'm concerned that we have people who are trying to ask questions and it's not coming through to us. I think it would be very comforting to me if somebody who's attending this meeting would type a question so that Bill or I could see it pop up. If that doesn't work, I would encourage one of the attendees to put a short note in the chat box and send it to organizers and panelists. And we'll see if we actually have a way for the audience members to talk back.
So I just saw. Oh, okay. So we do have. I was looking in the chat box, and we do have questions. And that box is tiny. Hold on just a second. Okay. So we'll run through these. First, will this PowerPoint be made available for us to download? Yes, it will. It'll be on the DI Colorado site. Next question. More detailed explanation of the difference between movement method and propulsion method would be useful, and how both need to be changed. Having difficulty explaining this to my team. Okay. So we were probably going to touch on this a little bit, but it's as good a time as any right now, I think. That part of it, so the differentiating between movement method and propulsion method and propulsion system, excuse me. Yes, that is going to be challenging, I think, especially with some of the younger teams. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up the challenge here. I think of so I think a first, maybe a first strategy would be to come in and if you can, go ahead and take a hint from the challenge if possible. As you look here at movement methods, you're seeing that some examples of movement methods are walking, sliding, hopping, flying, swimming, rolling, crawling, that type of thing. So you can kind of start there. You can definitely kind of try and expand on that. I think the next step is to go in and actually look. So 3A and 4A, I think, are going to be both very important to kind of try and get a team on track. Go through the movement method and try to break down and say, so all parts that are used to move the vehicle, and actually this is also the subject of one of our clarifications, and if you give me a moment, I'll bring it up. So clarification number 2, and this is a change, but it could be significant for some. Movement method includes all parts of the vehicle that are used to move the vehicle when energy from the propulsion system is applied. I know that that's not exactly a seismic change from what it says, but I think it does clarify a little bit. And all parts of the vehicle. So what this does is kind of what they've added is it's parts of the vehicle. I think there was some confusion about some parts that potentially couldn't have been part of the vehicle. But also, I guess, so the next part of that would be to kind of break this down and really try to key in on, okay, what parts are used to move the vehicle, and try to put a start and a finish line almost on that. Where does that start and where does that end? And then going into propulsion system, which I think is going to be similar. Propulsion system, go ahead and take a look, and it's the design and parts that store, provide, and apply energy. And I think you're going to be working with your team. Okay, what's storing the energy? What's providing the energy? And what's applying the energy? And then that's your propulsion system, and kind of try to get as specific as possible. And then maybe when you kind of break those down, they might be able to see the difference, as well as maybe see the difference between two propulsion systems and what makes them up. Dave, do you have any more?
Yeah, if you're running into problems with getting people to understand this, and it might be the language, and the way I would approach it with some teams is that the movement methods is really the motions, the things that are moving that allow the vehicle to progress across the presentation area. So I think the examples of walking and flying and hopping, those are all about the motion that anything could take as it covered that distance. So it's really more about the motion, whereas the propulsion is really focused on the energy. How are you providing energy to drive the motion that you've selected? So when I've tried to explain it to younger teams, the movement method sometimes is a little bit challenging as words, but they seem to warm up to the idea that it's actually the motion of the vehicle that sort of is defining how it goes across, whereas the propulsion system is the power or the force or the energy that makes that motion happen. I think that's what the writers of this challenge were really trying to get at, without, of course, getting people too boxed in and allow them to have a lot of freedom for invention and creativity.
Well, and I think to kind of expand on that, I think movement methods, it might be better to think of it. Movement method is not necessarily a thing. It's going to be more action-oriented. Propulsion systems are going to it's design, but it's also parts. So there's going to be things associated with that. I hope that helps. Next question. Do both the movement method and the propulsion system need to be changed at the same time? I'm going to go show that and highlight right there. For a change to be successful, both the propulsion system and movement method must be different from the previously successfully completed trip. So I think straight from the challenge, yeah. Our next question is pushing a different propulsion system than pulling. I think that's going to get back, and I'll kind of say this right now, a little bit of a disclaimer. We have to be very careful about ourselves not interfering. Appraisers can interfere just as much as a team manager or anybody else can. So I hope you don't find some of our answers frustrating, but we do have to be careful about not interfering. In this case, I hope kind of what we explained maybe a little bit about the difference between the movement methods and the propulsion systems helped. But I would also say, you know, again, go into propulsion system, and it's so the design and all parts that store, provide, or apply energy. And I think you can kind of address that and ask your team, okay, is pushing, is that really a propulsion system? Is that a design or is it parts? And that might help them get to that question. Dave, do you have anything to add to that one, or?
Yeah, I guess the other thing I would say is I would work through the thinking on it with the team, because push and pull, you know, those are simple words that mean different things to different people. So I think that the team has to be thinking about how a push or a pull represent both a method of movement or a method of propulsion. And if they're different, then they're different. As Bill said, we're not really in the position, we're not going to say, you know, push and pull, certainly that's good. And we're also very unlikely to say push and pull, well, that can't be two different things, because the challenge doesn't say those things, right? If the challenge intended to put a hard and fast rule in place, it would be there. It would have words like the teams must or the teams may not. So I suppose it's possible that a push and a pull could be acceptable and a push and a pull could not be acceptable, but it's really going to get to a deeper level to evaluate what is the method of movement and what is the propulsion system. And I don't think whether it's sort of dragging something behind it or pushing something in front of it is enough to answer that question one way or another. So just have to get back in and think through the challenge, try to be careful on the words that are there, again, the issues of what must be done and can't be done, and appreciate that if it doesn't say you can't, then that most likely means you can.
Okay, so our next question, can you talk about the protection of the nice gym floors? And there's a little bit more to it. We will, I think, get to that later, and if we don't, definitely remind me that that's there if for some reason we missed that. So I'll skip on to the next one for now. So the 20 changes can be the same changes, just done several times over the course of the presentation. So I think I understand the question. You know, you're going to have two movement methods and propulsion systems.
At least.
Right, sorry. And as long as it fits the definition of change, then it's going to qualify. It doesn't necessarily have to say, you know, what those changes have to be.
I think maybe the spirit of this question is that it have to be 20 different changes, and for it to be a change, as is highlighted on the screen, it just has to be different from the last previously successful trip. so that you could get a score for a change, go the other way, make another change, and as long as it's different from the previously completed trip, it's still different and it still represents a change. So you don't have to have it be different from every previous trip, just the one preceding trip. And that would allow you, I believe, to use a similar change multiple times and still have it be counted as a change, because all it has to do is be different from the previously successful trip.
Okay, so we got another question on the floors. That's probably at the point where I wasn't getting questions. Everybody was wondering what was happening. So the next one, this can be answered later. Can we have a caboose? Well, so this looks like it's let me read it for a second here. It looks like it's kind of specific to a specific solution. And so I'm reluctant to read it over the. So there's a question here about a setup. I'll say I think I would encourage you to ask that in a clarification. I don't think we should because it's for a very specific solution. And then we get into hello test question. This is the part where I was. We've got some very interesting test questions.
Good.
How much horsepower lifts 70 pounds?
Yeah.
So I'm a new team. This one, I'm a new team manager. Can you give an example of a team choice element? While I hesitate to give a specific example, it can really be anything that like I said, that the team has spent time on. It can be a talent. It can be a team-created performance. It can be a team-created item. It can be really whatever the team defines. And keep in mind, the team can define it as broad or as narrow as they want to. And actually, so I'll give an example, which I'm kind of not supposed to do. But if it were a certain artwork, they can say if they specifically want a specific one, if they want all of it. Now that could affect how they how it's appraised, but it's really up to the team, both the specific item, but also the breadth of what they want. So I got a question. Also, I would like to know if gasoline and fire can be used.
Hopefully that was the best question.
I'm not sure if that was. It's definitely in the rules of the road that it's not allowed. We will touch a little bit, I think, right at the end on the rules of the road a little bit. But no. So can the child riding the vehicle be part of the propulsion? And just give me a sec. Dave, if you want to.
Well, I want to find the wording on that one.
Well, I'm doing the same. I'm looking for it myself. So there's challenge wording, and I've also found one of the clarifications specifically addresses this, and that's clarification number 3. For middle, secondary, and university level teams, a team member may not be part of a propulsion system. Oh, I'm sorry. I got them mixed up. It's number 1. An elementary team level member may be part of the propulsion system, but then he or she is not also counted as a team member being carried by the vehicle. So I think that should give you some direction on that. So the next question, similarly, if a child pedals a bicycle, is that allowed? Is the child the propulsion method? And what we'll do is go and take a look at propulsion systems. And I think what you'll have to do is work through this with your team. And the best way would be to go in and say, what items store, provide, or apply energy to the vehicle? And, if that child is storing, providing, or applying energy, they would be considered part of that propulsion system. I also got to repeat that, but I'm not sure. So we got another question. Does it mean that the movement method is the way it moves and the propulsion is the energy source? I hope kind of what we've gone over maybe clarified some of that. We have another question about movement versus propulsion. I got a question, how much horsepower lifts 70 pounds? I don't know the answer to that.
Depends on the force of gravity.
Does the energy have to be stored on the vehicle, or can it be stored externally and used to apply force to the vehicle? While I don't think we can answer that specifically, I will say that I think, again, if you go in and look at the definition of those propulsion systems, and that just keep in mind that propulsion systems include the parts that store energy. And again, one of the reasons too that we don't answer specifically is it's really hard for us to anticipate what exactly your solution might look like. So can you review the elementary level clarification? That's not the right. I think you're referring to clarification number 1. And I think, yeah, we kind of talked about that. So elementary level team member may be part of the propulsion system, but if so, then he or she is not also counted as a team member being carried by the vehicle. So I think, to interpret that, if you've got an elementary level team member that is part of the propulsion system, then you still have to carry the weight of a different team member. While a team member cannot be a propulsion system, could the weight of the team member be part of one? Without specifically seeing that, it would be hard to say. I would definitely encourage that question to go as a clarification. Dave, do you?
Yeah, again, I think that people have had that question. I think the first and third clarifications are both trying to help give further clarity to the issue of how a team member can interact as part of the propulsion system. And just so people know that when you read the clarification, it's sort of the same as taking out what it says in the originally printed challenge and replacing it with the new language. So when it says that 4C should read this, that means that the clarification as written supersedes 4C as it's written in the bigger challenge. So if you have to choose between the two, always choose the clarification. So for example, in that third clarification, it talks about what the older groups can do to store energy in a propulsion system. And there's been some wording changes between what was originally written as 4D and what is in the clarification as 4D. And I think it helps clarify the intent of the creators of this challenge in terms of what they want people to understand as things that they cannot do as well as things that they are free to do. So read those carefully, and appreciate that the clarifications supersede what's written in the challenge that everybody got at the beginning of the season. It's like the original language has disappeared and been replaced by new and improved language. Bill, we have about 10 minutes left. Do we have more? And I can't see questions. They apparently just come to you.
Yeah.
Do we want to touch on the last few slides and then try and hit some more questions, or?
Are we 8 or are we till 8:30? I'm sorry.
Well, don't take my word for it then. I'll check. I was concerned that we were running out of time.
Well, we're scheduled to have the webinar till 8:30, so.
Okay.
We do have a few more questions. I think we'll probably start moving through them a little quicker.
Okay.
Let me work.
Thank you.
Back to those. What if a trip one way was not successful? I think you'll have to take a look. Obviously that wouldn't be a scored trip. That also would affect potentially how whether a team is eligible for a change. If you work through, right? So you have to
believe a team can change or attempt to change, but they won't necessarily get scored for having successfully completed a change.
Right. They have to have a previously completed trip, successfully completed trip, and then complete a successful trip afterwards. Hate to be picky. To cross the line, does this vehicle need to totally cross the width of the tape on the floor, or just touch the tape on the floor? That is, I believe, under trips. Must travel from behind line A to cross line B.
Must be completely across the second line at the end of a trip.
Yes.
I think the appraisers are likely to interpret that as they should get past the tape.
And if it does come down to your team being confused, if it's the front of the tape or the back of the tape, I think it's worth asking the appraisers on site. Depending on how they measured it, they may have measured it differently, but it's going to be based on the presentation site, which is 14 feet 1 inch. Can gliding your vehicle over a floor surface that incorporates wheels, but the wheels are not part of the vehicle itself, allow for no wheel points since this is not a wheel attached to the vehicle? Again, that one I think I would encourage you to ask an official clarification on that. Without seeing specific solutions, it's hard to say, but I think you'll have to get into the specific definitions of what is the vehicle and how those without wheels points are going to work. To follow on the push or pull as propulsion, I would add to that to ask if propulsion has to begin behind the vehicle, especially if you read a definition of propulsion. So I hope I'm understanding the question right. So for this particular challenge, propulsion is, I guess, as it's defined in the challenge. Not necessarily if you're finding a definition from somewhere else. It may not necessarily apply to this. Again, I hope I understand that question. Dave, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was struggling to understand the question, so.
Thanks for noticing our questions. I apologize for that. Are extra points awarded for carrying more than one team member on a trip? I'll just answer. To successfully complete a trip, you have to carry one, and you get awarded for trips, not not for what they're carrying. So 4D specifies that a team member can store energy. Right, so 4D, a team member can store energy into a propulsion system between trips and release that energy into the vehicle, and that's for middle, secondary, and university levels.
This is the subject of the clarification. You should pull that language up instead.
Okay. Cool. I just lost that window.
I'm seeing a tiny bit of it.
Sorry about that. Where's that, Dave?
The third challenge, that's the 4D that you were just pointing to. So, I mean, if you look carefully, it says, for example, may store energy into a propulsion system that is later applied to the vehicle, which I think is a change from how it was originally written. And again, to clarify, because I think there's some questions about if you can't be part or supply direct energy, what are the limits to what you mean by that, or what the writers of the challenge mean by that. And so they've changed this wording slightly to clarify their intent, that if they were to store energy into a propulsion system, that energy would later be applied to the vehicle or the movement method, which again I think is a change to indicate that they didn't intend for the stored energy to be immediately used or concurrently used or applied to the vehicle, for example. So this is a case where, again, you should take the language in the challenge and exit out as a reminder to you that that language has been modified globally for this challenge, with the goal, hopefully, of giving everybody greater clarity on the intent.
Okay, so section 3I mentions driving on a track if the solution, section 3I, well, yeah, 3DI. So if the solution did include a track, would the track also need to start behind point A and fully cross point B to complete a successful trip? As long as the vehicle starts behind point A and the vehicle finishes beyond point line B, you know, that's what constitutes that part of the successful trip. You know, so that's really what the salient point of that is. Does the propulsion system have to be on the vehicle? And I'm sorry, I'm just looking for the propulsion system is considered as part of the vehicle and it must travel with the vehicle across the presentation area for the purpose of making successful trips. As long as it meets that criteria, should be okay. Is there a height restriction? We also have another question on the floor type, and then another question about the site, which we're actually just about to talk about. So we will go right there. So quickly, this is just quickly a tournament site. We've got a couple photos to give you an idea. Up on the upper right is the minimum space that you're going to have at the tournament site, that 20 by 20 foot box. It's going to be where those lines are. Typically, and you should check with your RCM if this is going to be important to you or significant, critical to your team, they are larger rooms than that. Usually they are in a gym. Most of them are. Ours, I know in Southwest, we're not actually going to be in a gym, but we are going to be in a large space. There is nothing saying that the team is contained to that space. It says that that is the minimum space that they'll have. Other than that, they're free to use whatever space they want to. And those lines are considered, I'm not sure if it's in the challenge specifically or not. Those lines will be considered to extend beyond. So they will also be considered to be a three-dimensional plane, if that makes a difference. That goes into what is the floor type. The floor, we can't guarantee what the floor is necessarily going to be. There's a good chance it's going to be a gym floor, but it may necessarily not. We also have floors that are carpet. We have floors that are vinyl tile as well. Can we add anything to the floor to help our vehicle move more freely? We had that. Dave, what was?
Yeah, this is a good example of if it doesn't say you can't, then you probably can. What you need to I think be aware of is whether or not the material you put on the floor is in any way part of the vehicle or part of the movement method or part of the propulsion system. So because of the restrictions on that needing to go side to side, for example, if you wanted to lay something across the floor, it would be hard to do that and still be consistent with those rules if, in fact, it was part of the movement method, the propulsion system, or the vehicle. Of course, it has to be responsive to the rules of the road about protecting the floor, so we don't want things down that make things worse. Assuming we're not doing that, that's probably going in the right direction. The other thing is it's really important that the appraisers can see the lines that are there. So there's potentially a challenge in putting things down on the floor and obscuring the view of the appraisers of the lines, which would make it very challenging for them to properly appraise. And there's only one official set of lines, and that's the lines that are put down by the challenge master at the site to begin the day. So it's not as though teams get to come in and set down their own performance space and create new lines. So there's nothing that precludes it. You have to be careful about what role it's playing. If it's just simply protecting the floor, that's one. If it's enabling, again, I think it's important to look at propulsion and movement method and other things to make sure that the appraisers will understand that the material on the floor is not an issue there.
So we also had a question, is there a height restriction? And just general stuff about the presentation area can be found in rules of the road. We also have a specific requirement in the challenge this year that the vehicle can fit through a door, through a standard size door. If you do have a question about that, I think we would encourage you to talk to your regional challenge master. They're going to know what the site is. If you have to measure a door to the inch, hopefully that would be possible. And
just to make sure that just the parts of the vehicle have to fit through the door. The vehicle can be disassembled to go through a door, or that sort of thing. It doesn't say the assembled vehicle has to go through the door. Just the parts, like everything else that are part of the solution, have to fit through a standard door in some way, shape, or manner.
Well, and I think as far as a height, you would have a standard room height. Again, check with your RCM. They'll have an idea where the tournament site's going to be, and that they'll be able to tell you how high the ceiling is in there. There is no that I'm aware of. I don't believe there's a hard height restriction. I know for one of our solutions, we did have a minimum height that you were, and I'm struggling to find that, if we still have that. Do you know if we still have that requirement, Dave?
I don't recall it.
Okay. I know we had another question, too, about the floor. What would we be doing to protect the floor? And the answer is that's going to be up to the team. With vehicles driving across the floor, we are going to be paying a lot of attention to damage to the floor. All of these sites are donated. We like to be invited back. We've got some really nice venues, and so we will be we will be paying attention, and we will, if we see some damage going to the floor, we will pause the presentation and try and get the team to be able to remedy that. But it's going to kind of be up to the team to make sure that they have a vehicle that's not going to do damage to the floor. Oh, so we have a minimum ceiling of 10 feet. Somebody answered, I think, provided that for us. Thank you, appreciate that. What about if the vehicle crosses the tape but also goes in part or whole outside of the 10 by 10 square? We do not have a restriction on how far the vehicle could go on this particular challenge. Okay. So I guess with our remaining time, and I do think we have till 8:30, so we'll just kind of go through some miscellaneous stuff here at the end. A lot of people have trouble.
One more thing before we move off the floors and even maybe go back to the tournament site slide.
Sure.
For those of you who are new to the technical challenge or new to managing altogether, some of this gets covered in your general manager training, some doesn't. It's worth reiterating. But in this central challenge, the expectation is, of course, that you and your team will show up about half an hour ahead of your scheduled performance time. You'll get your materials into a check-in area where you will meet the first of the appraisers that you'll meet in the central challenge, the prep area appraiser. And that prep area appraiser is going to go through the paperwork to make sure that the description of the activities that the team is going to provide as part of their solution are clear enough that the appraisers will be able to appropriately appraise the performance. So they'll be working with the team on paperwork and clarity there. This is also where they will they'll get the information on the budget that the team put together, other information that's part of the document packet. But also an important part of the prep area appraisal process is evaluating for any issues having to do with safety. So this might be a time where electrical things get a little bit of inspection, wheels get a little bit of inspection, things that look sharp or pointy. We protect the participants, the appraisers, and the audience whenever we can. So the prep area appraiser will look at all of those things. Again, if they see an issue, they will try to highlight the issue and give the team an opportunity to resolve it. But you don't have a lot of time there at the prep area to resolve it. So hopefully everything that comes in is ready to compete and documented sufficiently. The team's ready to go, and then it can just be about getting the team excited about their performance. Before their performance begins, they'll typically move all their materials close to the performance area into a launch area. That's where the team will gather while they get introduced to the audience, and then the person who's presenting or introducing the team will start the 8-minute time, at which point the team members can begin to move out of the prep area to do whatever they need to do to move their vehicles and start presenting their solution to the challenge. The appraisers will go wherever they need to, so the team doesn't need to worry about whether appraisers can see or hear so much, as long as it's possible for the appraisers to get to a point where they can see and hear. They will move around the performance area to the point where they can make sure that they can effectively evaluate and appraise the solution that the team's put on. When the time is up or the performance is over, whichever first, then we encourage the crowd to express their tremendous appreciation to the team managers, of course, And then there's an opportunity for the appraisers to talk to the individual team members one-on-one, learn more about what they gained through the experience of DI, more about their solution, get questions answered, fill in blanks, and so forth. And then the team is done with the central challenge, and they can gather up their stuff with the help of friends and family, and move it out of the performance area and make way for the next team to do likewise.
Okay, we also got a question that I missed. Can we put water on the floor? I think the answer to that is mostly that depends. That'd be a question for the RCM who's going to be in charge of the site. I know typically, and you'll have to check with them specifically, but typically if you demonstrate a way that it's going to be contained, that it's going to be cleaned up, and that you're fairly sure that you're not going to be able to do any damage or actually get any on the floor, typically that would be okay. But it also, I guess, depends on kind of the quantity you're talking about and what the likelihood of that going wrong might be.
The same is true of glitter and talcum powder and all sorts of other things that might be part of an exciting solution, but which might create a challenge for the next team or the condition of the floor.
Right. One of our first questions is going to be, how are you going to contain it? How are you going to clean it up?
Exactly.
So getting really quickly, kind of getting moving, getting unstuck. I think a lot of team managers kind of have those questions. The first is really get into that challenge and read it with a critical eye, identifying the musts, must-nots, mays, may-nots, the things that they must do, the things that they absolutely should not do or that they can't do. And then, beyond that, if it doesn't say you can't, then you can. Kind of challenge the team's ideas of normal. And remember, if a vehicle meets the requirements of a vehicle in the challenge, it's a vehicle. It may not kind of pass someone else's perception of what a vehicle is, but if you're able to read through that vehicle section, go through, it meets the requirements, it meets all that, then it's a vehicle as far as DI is concerned. Look at things, go forward, backwards, sideways. Some teams are going to start more with the solution and then work back and say, how can we fit it into what the challenge says? Others are going to say, we've got these talents and these things, how are we going to get a solution? Have them look around. Is it a vehicle? Is it a movement method? What's a propulsion system on that? Start looking at things. What's that propulsion system? What's that movement method? Another thing that Susie recommended, there's nothing saying that you can't do an instant challenge that's based on this challenge with your team, that you can have them do something like that. We'll talk on the next slide, I think, a little bit about interference real quick. But that's not interference. That's managing them. And then take as many hints from the challenge as you can. Again, kind of one of the big tip-offs, the walking, sliding, flying, hopping, that type of thing, lets you know what the challenge riders were thinking and hopefully can help your team get unstuck if that happens. So we want to talk just real quick too about interference. I know there's a lot of questions about interference, and basically it's okay to teach the skills, techniques, and concepts. You just can't do anything or provide any of those ideas, the design, or the solution. And team managers can absolutely manage. We get a lot of questions about how much a team manager can do to manage their team. And Susie has a good one. I mean, you can tell your team, you can absolutely, especially with an elementary team, you may have to tell them, we're not leaving this room until you guys decide on a vehicle. You can do that. I mean, that's your role as a team manager. They're going to need structure. They're going to need some direction. But all the ideas for that solution need to come from the team, and all the work needs to be done by the team. And when we say work, that's also, putting things together. If it requires power tools, something like that, the team has to do that. Even if it's an elementary team, they kind of either have to do it or you're going to have to help them find a workaround. You can definitely teach them how to use it. You can show them, you can demonstrate first, then sit as they use whatever they use and your finger poised on the off button ready to pull the plug. But if they're gonna go ahead and if that is going to be used to fabricate their solution, then they have to go ahead and perform all that work themselves. Dave, do you have anything to add on interference?
Yeah, I think that sometimes as a manager, it's useful to think about, does it appear in the final solution? And that's the part of the work of the team that you want to have the greatest sensitivity about in terms of interference. Is it a line of dialogue? Is it where a person stands? Is it, this vehicle element or that vehicle element? If it appears in the presentation and the solution, those are the things where you really want the kids on the team to make the decisions and come up with the solution. But that doesn't mean that if they want to have, an electrical circuit in their final device, that you can't teach them how to make an electrical circuit. Just don't make the electrical circuit that is in the final solution. Let the team empower the kids, teach them the necessary skills to do it. But I think that sometimes these questions of all the work and all the ideas and things like that can get to be very difficult to reconcile. And when you think that you're in one of those positions, I encourage you to just consider the idea that what we're really focused on is the solution that they provide to the appraisers on the day of the performance. Those are the things that are most important, that they are done by the kids, and it's clear that it's done by the kids. The learning process, the practice, the prototypes, the things that all happen as part of the overall learning experience of DI and so forth, that's where the real opportunities to teach new skills, techniques, and concepts, and let the kids explore things and see what works and doesn't work. And the team managers certainly have a much more sort of hands-on active role there.
Okay, so real quick too on paperwork, just kind of a thing that we notice a lot. I think it's good for teams to take their time with it. This is really the team's chance to make sure the appraisers are going to see the right things, that their movement methods, their propulsion systems are defined the way they want them. And I'll just tell you, we see a lot of teams come in and we see some paperwork that's a little bit hard to sometimes interpret. And then we ask the team about it, and they immediately say, "Oh, no, that's not what we meant." And I think, sometimes paperwork is a little bit of an afterthought on the way to the tournament, maybe. But I think, it's just worth taking a little bit of time with it, and maybe having the team read it and then read it again, take some time and read it again, and just make sure that, I know it makes sense to the team. They know exactly what they want the appraisers to look at. They know exactly what their solution is, and sometimes that doesn't quite come across in the paperwork. We also have a question: can the manager fill out the paperwork? Does the team need to do it? And it's specifically an elementary team. You can, the team manager can do the writing. If handwriting and that type of thing, legibility is an issue, but it needs to be in the team's own words. So they've got to be able to dictate that to you, but it needs to be the team's words that are on the paperwork. We've also got another question: do the kids need to move everything in on their own, or can parents, leaders help? I'm going to bring over rules of the road. It's going to take me a second to find it. I know it's in here. But it basically tells you, sorry, it's going to take me a second to fumble through this, but it basically lets you know when parents or other people and even equipment is allowed to be used. Okay, here we go. I think it's in here. Oh, I'm sorry, that's expenses. It is in Rules of the Road. I know it's there. I just saw it. But it basically gives you a guideline that, parents can help up to the staging area, but then during the presentation, it's all got to be the team during the presentation. And like I said, I apologize for not being able to find it, but like I said, I do know it's in there. What is the time interval between team challenges was also a question. That really just depends on the day and how many teams we have. I guess something we didn't quite, and I realize I'm running up against time here, I guess we didn't talk, Dave talked a little bit about it, is, afterwards, the appraisers are really going to be talking to the team. We're going to take our time to try and get an idea. We'll be asking them questions about, how did you get this idea? What was your, what was your thinking? What was your process behind this, to try to get a little bit of, appreciation for all the work that they've put in, and that'll go into our appraising. And that, so we leave a decent amount of time for that. So, typically we'll have, I would say, at least 10 minutes between one team to the next. But it could be, it could definitely be longer. It may be a little bit shorter at state where we get more teams, but it really just depends on the tournament day schedule.
Very often you'll see 20-minute cycle times, unless the tournament has an extremely large number of teams and people are concerned about the length of the day, or they have very few teams and they just want to stretch it out a little bit to make sure that they don't fall behind. But 20 minutes is a good rule of thumb.
Okay, I think if anybody's got any last-minute questions, go ahead, type them in. But I think that's kind of, Dave, I don't know if you have anything to add. It's kind of driving me a little crazy that I can't find that section about when parents can help move props, but I guess.
Well, again, the parents definitely can't do it from when the team says you may begin to when the performance is over, because it has to be a team-generated performance, and getting things out during the 8 minutes is part of the performance and part of the solution time. So definitely no help from managers or people at that key area. I have seen many tournaments where once you check in with the prep area appraiser, then it's all pretty much in the team's hands until we're ready to clear the performance area, and then managers and parents and friends and fellows can come out and help move things.
So I should have just looked at the table of contents, because apparently they hid it from me right under the section titled Moving Scenery and Props. So it's right there. Tells you that once the team scenery props are in the launch area, only team members may touch them and move them into the presentation area. It basically goes through it right there. So I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew it was there somewhere. So Dave, do you have anything else to add?
As a person who started in DI about a decade ago, learning to be an appraiser to support my daughter as she started in elementary school in DI, later becoming an assistant manager and a manager before moving on into doing sort of more organizational things for DI. I can say I truly appreciate the leap of faith and the commitment that it takes for people to become managers. We're very excited about the technical challenge this year. It's got a lot of opportunities for exciting, crazy solutions. If people actually can somehow manage to do 40 trips in 8 minutes, it's just going to be a blur of activity. So this is an extremely open-ended, exciting challenge. I think it's going to bring out some great solutions. It's going to be a great challenge to watch. If your team's not competing and has the energy and interest to watch some others, that would be great. But I just want to thank you. This is a volunteer organization. We rely on managers, and we do our best as organizers to try and support the managers in what they're doing, with the ultimate goal, of course, to give the kids a great experience and a great opportunity. So thank you not only for joining this evening, but the much harder work of managing the teams and supporting them through this long process. having been there myself on a number of years with a number of kids in different areas, I can say I understand, I'm sympathetic. I'm also very grateful to you because I think this is a program, and hopefully you come out the end of this season feeling strongly that it's a great program that was worth the effort you're going to put into it. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, I agree with Dave. I think you guys have the toughest job as managers, so good luck. I hope we helped you out. And yeah, a copy of the webinar will be posted. And if you have any questions, get in touch with your RCMs. They're kind of your first line of communication on up to the ACMs, and ask those clarifications if you have questions. Thanks, guys.